PLD, PJ Campbell, two mediocre white dudes on film. Because frankly, we know you don't have enough of that in your life. So we're here to give you more. And without further ado, here are two mediocre white dudes on film.
Welcome back to another podcast with two mediocre white dudes in the space talking about a movie that's over 20 years old. I'm PJ Campbell. That's PLD. That way.
I am PLD, and that's PJ Campbell. And we are two very mediocre, very white, very dudish.
So and pretty much every podcast you've ever listened to, we're like that. Except
I feel like saying
maybe not as
we're every podcast.
I don't know.
I think we're definitely as funny.
Maybe
as funny.
I don't know. We were just talking about this before we started. We have a friend in the space who has told me before, he's like, if you had a good 5 minutes, I'd put you up on stage as a stand-up comic. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm that funny.
I think you're that funny.
I don't know. It's always situational humor for me.
Yeah, you know what the thing is? I think you're that funny. I don't know if the world would think you're that funny.
They probably would.
That's the question.
You know why? I'm another mediocre white dude. Actually, that means they probably would think I'm funny.
That's true, because mediocre white dudes would definitely think you're funny. Because I think you're funny, and I am a mediocre white dude.
This is going great so far.
This is phenomenal. This is what we're here for. Welcome to our podcast. This is what we're going to be dealing with. If you want to stick around, if you want to quit out now, I kind of get it already because we're just, like I said, two mediocre white dudes. But that's not actually why we're here.
I mean, it could be why we're here. Actually, I guess we should talk about this up top because number one, we're going to be talking about Scream. Tonight we're talking about Scream. Came out in 96. Mm-hmm. It's a movie that we all love. There's another Scream coming out. Feels weird. It's just called Scream.
Cream almost.
I hate this. We'll get into it eventually, I'm sure, but I hate the reboot, remake, sequel thing where they rename it the same thing.
Again.
It's really lazy.
And again.
Because
it is the worst thing you can do.
Halloween came out in 1978. It didn't come out in 2018, but then they were like, well, it actually came out in 2018. And you know why I'm annoyed by this, Paul?
Why are you annoyed by this?
This is actually, his name is Paul. We call him PLD. His name is Paul. So when I call him Paul, that's his name.
That's Patrick. So I could slip that in once in a while too.
The thing that bothers me is because you and I write movie trivia for a living.
Right. We do.
We write movie trivia for a living for a league that is known on YouTube called the Movie Trivia Schmodown. And what's funny about that for me, and super fucking irritating a lot of the time, is that this becomes a problem for us when we're writing questions. I don't know why Gordon Green couldn't just be like, it was called Halloween Returns.
It's plain, simple, easy, done.
Right.
But no. It's Halloween 2018.
And the same thing with Scream. Like, you couldn't have called it anything else?
I gotta say real quick, not to go off too many tangents, but that's what you're going to get on the show. We do tangents. It's just going to happen. Halloween 2018 isn't even Halloween. It's actually Halloween 2.
Right. That's my point. This is my point. This right here, and the audio listeners can't see, I'm waving my hands. I think there might be people who see video later of me waving my hands around. I talk with my hands a lot.
Discussion about that.
You guys are going to learn a whole lot about us while we talk about movies over the next however long we decide to podcast together.
Absolutely. Which we should actually discuss real quick. I think what we are going to do in this podcast, we're going to go in seasons. I think we discussed this on top. We're going to go 5 weeks in a row on a franchise. Probably take a week off or 2 weeks off, whatever. We'll jump into another franchise. What are we doing this year? We actually haven't discussed much except for doing Scream because Scream 5 is coming out. And then later on we'll do Halloween.
I had a thought, and I'm pitching it to you now before we start talking about
live on the podcast.
I want to do Jurassic Park because I want to be able to get to Fallen Kingdom and tell everybody why they're wrong for hating Fallen Kingdom.
You're going to tell me why I'm wrong for not liking Fallen Kingdom.
Exactly.
That's okay.
No, that's why I want to do this. And I want to get Brandon Hanna on it. I'm just throwing names out there. Because Fallen Kingdom is a goddamn good movie, and we're going to have the conversation about it. And I think I lost at least 90% of our listeners already off that one comment.
Yeah, they're done. They just left. We're doing this for ourselves now.
You know what, man?
That's okay.
Again, I'm a mediocre white dude. It's fine.
And that's definitely a mediocre white dude movie.
I mean, I'm not going to say that's wrong. Written by,
boy, here we are.
Specifically, we should say written by.
Written by.
Because J.A. Boyona, I'm pretty sure, not Mediocre White Dude.
No, that's true. That's true.
Just throwing that out there. J.A. Boyona, not a Mediocre White Dude.
Not
You're going to get past Mediocre White Dude jokes. I promise. We have probably already had it out. Say it's welcome in at least the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, but you know what? That's kind of our brand also. We're those kind of guys. We'll take a bit, hit it, kill it, continue to beat it, and all of a sudden it comes back around as funny again. Yeah. So by the time we're done, it will be funny again. I promise you. I'm not sure when that'll be.
It will be. I have to say.
I think now you have to stick around for the whole podcasting until it becomes funny again.
I mean, really, isn't this movie just about a couple of mediocre white dudes who want to be famous anyway?
That is exactly what this is about. That's a great segue. This is why I hired this guy and paid him the big bucks.
I just held it to join me. Head. It's fine.
Okay. Let's get into this a little bit. Scream, 1996. Where are we at this part? This kind of interesting part of this podcast.
I'm 6 years old.
Because that's what I'm saying. Like, this is the best part of this podcast. I'm slightly older. I'm slightly older than PJ here. So we're going to have definitely two different viewpoints of where we were and where horror was. You're going to find that we're doing a lot. PJ said Jurassic Park, and I said that's a great idea. We're not limiting ourselves to horror, but we both are going to love horror. So I feel like horror is going to come up a lot. So
yeah, that's very true, because I think that there's a lot that people overlook in the genre. It's a thing I've talked about a lot. It's a thing that I've made it a point over the last 2 years in my time in the Schmodown to try to make horror more relevant. It's something that you and I, as we started working together, we were like, horror movies need its push. It needs its love. Like, I've been having so much fun with it. But where is the state of horror in 1996? You have this real interesting kind of flagship of Wes Craven deciding to do a new horror franchise. He had been primarily known for doing a lot of like one-off stuff, and of course for creating Nightmare on Elm Street. But the interesting thing is about 2 years before this, is 1994, he had come back to the Nightmare franchise, and he did Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is actually really like a sweet dovetail into this movie, because that was the first time I remember him really dealing with like the meta nature of the things that he was doing, because everything about New Nightmare sets the template for him doing something like Scream.
Which is funny because he almost didn't do Scream. He wasn't actually, he had to get pulled into it. But before we get into that story, I think this actually begins a little bit earlier. And it's a very interesting, I mean, I will say that horror is a very, it's a very inner circle kind of thing. Like, they all kind of like dealt with each other. They all kind of bounce off each other. Obviously have Freddy versus Jason. A lot of times horror films will beget other horror franchises as it goes. I think the beginnings of Scream really start with Halloween. The original Halloween. Yeah. Williamson loves Halloween. He ended up writing for H2O, which is one of your favorite other sequels of the franchise, and also something that is very inspired by Scream, as we'll have to discuss probably in the H2O episode, but we do that much later on in the year.
And it's funny,
you have Halloween,
because not only Halloween, but like in that vein, Steve Miner directed H2O, and we'll get to that too, but Friday the 13th. So obviously Williamson knows the people he's playing ball with.
Exactly. And you mentioned Friday the 13th. That was actually my next point. Jason Lives, I feel, is very much a ancestor of sorts to this as well, because it began kind of that meta feel a little bit. It really had that feel where there's a little wink and nod to the camera, but not ever quite dipping over into that full blown out comedy thing, which we'll discuss in the coming weeks. I think is kind of maybe the fault of Scream 3 and Scream 4 a little bit comparatively, but we will get there. But right now we had Jason Lives. We have Wes Craven's New Nightmare. But in general, the slasher franchises had been kind of hitting a dead end at that point. They weren't making money in the box office anymore. They were kind of dying slowly. They were mocked and everything else. The franchise, or the genre, needed a kind of kick in the ass. Yeah, that's when Scream came along, because right when it needed to be.
When you look at it, Jason Goes to Hell, it comes out in 93, and it bombs like super spectacularly. It makes, I mean, not bombs. The movie was made for like $3 million, but it made and it made about 16. But you have to think about it. Friday was one of the strongest franchises through the 80s. They had 8 installments through the 1980s.
Yep.
Jason Goes to Hell is so bad that Jason doesn't come back to screen until 2001. So horror's kind of in a rut, and it's New Nightmare is the one that pushes it. Because New Nightmare comes out, and it's like, how can we elevate what we've been doing with slasher films? How can we, like, push it in a different direction? Because even Halloween's already hit the rut. Like, Halloween 4 comes out, it puts the franchise back on track for a lot of people, but then Halloween 5 comes out and totally derails the thing all over again.
And then we got to 6, and then that was...
Which comes out
in
nadir 96, the same year.
5 or 96?
Yeah.
I believe it was 96, yeah.
So
it's the nadir of the franchise at that point, considered by many at that point. So that's where we are. And I must say, I like what you said about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It did
95
feel a little different. 95. That's like I was like, I said 96. I was like, wait, was it 96? I think we're 95. We got it. It was the 6. Halloween 6 part of it kind of threw us for a second.
That's it.
Well, if not, we'll say that's what it is.
No, I'm going with it. I like that you're going there. You guys have to understand how much information we put in our heads most of the time. I'm usually within at least a year when we're talking about these things.
Exactly. We have to check it all the time. When we direct questions, we got to double check that year because sometimes it just throws us for a loop.
Yeah.
But what I want to say about Wes Craven's New Nightmare is it definitely did spark something. However, it wasn't. I don't believe it was super successful at the time. It still wasn't anything that was really. I mean, it was critically successful. I felt like, but it didn't really leave as much of a zeitgeist as it should have.
You know what's funny about New Nightmare is it was the first one I saw.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because. Truth be told, like, as much as I love horror movies, it was a thing that was in my family that was not watched a ton until I started bringing them into the house. But even then, my parents were, like, very resistant on me doing it because I'm an only child that grew up in a Christian conservative household.
Okay.
So that explains a lot about, like, there's a lot of trying to box you in, but by, like, 98, 99, satellite television and stuff has really become, like, mainstream popular for most households in America. And my parents put satellite in all the rooms in the house, and Showtime came with our package, and I want to say so did the early versions of HBO Max and Starz.
Okay.
And Showtime was predominantly showing horror films a lot of the time during the day, and it was always like the off-brand sequels, like Halloween 6. Halloween 6 was the second Halloween movie I ever saw.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
But New Nightmare was on all the time, and it was weird that was my first introduction to it, and I think that's actually painted my, like, overall picture of the Nightmare series, but also it definitely played into the stuff that I like about horror, because it very much left an impact on me very early on to be like, oh, horror can be, like, super goofy and kind of, like, knowing, winking at itself and weird.
Right.
And
okay.
doing something that wasn't normal, and I think because of that, it's why Scream ended up being so impactful on me. And I mean, it impacted all of us, but from New Nightmare being something that, like, hit me very young before I saw Scream, because I don't see Scream until probably 99, maybe 2000. Okay. So I see it after the fact. I recognize the box everywhere I go. I see the posters. Right. Like, I remember the Hollywood Video in our town with all the big posters for Scream 2. Like, it was the guaranteed rental. If we don't have it, you know, we'll give you a free rental or whatever it was back in the day. And so I always kind of knew what the movies were. And I remember seeing the trailers because my parents used to take me to the movies a ton.
Right.
But I never saw them unless I was, like, sneak watching them on cable at home. Gotcha, or somehow like sneaking a movie through, like, when we'd go out and rent things.
Right. Okay. Well, very interesting. I think Nightmare is a franchise that I love, and I think we'll definitely eventually end up doing. Since we're gonna do horror, we're gonna do the big franchises. Probably that's a good thing to watch through. So we'll definitely get into New Nightmare. I'm very interested to hear more about that, because how much of your first viewing, because that movie is so. It depends on the earlier parts of the franchise to really get. So as a first view, it's got to be very interesting. But save that for
that's a much later story. But I just thought it was interesting it sets the table, if you will, for me as a movie watcher.
So here we are, 1996's Scream. Now in the development, do you know what it was originally called by Williamson?
Scary Movie.
So interesting to me. That's so interesting.
I know, which
a while back, and I'm like,
the Weinsteins still used. Because, as we know, the Weinsteins all produced these first four. The less said about them, the better. But
that's all I'm going to say about them.
They definitely used the title later for the spoof franchise, just,
Right.
a couple years later, which I find so funny is that he was like, man, that sounds like a good title. We're just going to use it again.
And it was. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It ended up being very well for them. It fit that movie perfectly. Actually fits that movie far better than if it's Scream, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
The Scary Movie is what Scream has the balance. Scary Movie just tips that balance way into the parody section, obviously. But let's get into Scream itself. Like, in the overall thoughts, we're going to go into a deep dive into the film. I thought that the overall balance is what made Scream so successful. It was a balance of like the wink wink. It had that bit of comedy, because horror is a genre that unlike a lot of other genres, it's got that kind of like, I think it's like Red Sox Nation. Like, when you know you're a horror fan, it's almost like you're in a family of people.
Why'd you have to mention the Red Sox?
I know. I did that. I thought about PJ's a Yankee fan. He might not appreciate it as
much.
I
don't. I don't appreciate that. I feel like I need to go now.
You'd be attacked. Are you feeling attacked?
I'm feeling a little attacked. That was kind of rude, actually.
It was we meant in a loving way. I mean, we love you.
No. The Red Sox fans love to hate me.
That's true. No, we're over it now. We've beaten you a couple of times. We're okay now. We're not
salt wound me.
We're not the little boys anymore who are getting spanked around. So we're okay hanging out with you guys.
We do not condone spanking little boys, Paul.
That's true. As two mediocre white dudes, we don't condone spanking little boys. Very true. Again, I digress. We are a family, though. Horror fans seem to have this kind of loving franchise that, like, a lot of genres don't have. That kind of this. I don't know how you really describe it, but Scream uses that, which is why it's so successful. I mean, it's a good horror film on its own. Great horror film on its own. It does everything it's supposed to do, but it's like it brings you along with it. It's like, I'm going to make this with you. We're going to tell you the story. You're right here with us, and you know what's coming up. We're going to try to subvert you here and there. We're mainly going to give you what you want and give you a wink and nod while we're at it.
Well, that's the thing. Like, horror, we all watch it all the time because there's something that drives this need to feel scared in a communal experience where it feels like it's scary, but it's fun and it's exciting and you laugh and you share these experiences with people who have a like-minded fun of fear. That sounds so weird, but you're right. That's why we watch it. It's why it continues to be such a popular genre. It's why you can do so much of what we're doing. And Kevin Williamson is such a fan of that. Like, it's so clear that he came from the school of the 70s Carpenter stuff. It's so clear that he's a big fan of the slasher films. It's all in the DNA of everything he's ever written. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. He's always liked horror movies. Look at The Faculty. That's a Kevin Williamson written movie too. And it feels just like so many of the other things that we loved. Again, talk about Carpenter. It's very kind of the thing.
You're not wrong.
Like, that's kind of what it's going for. And, Invasion of the Body Snatchers and all these sorts of things. But that communal aspect is what has always made it special. And I think that Scream was kind of the embodiment of taking that communal aspect and being like, what if we made a movie that is like this love letter to all the things that we've always liked? And how can we like show love to it and massage it, but make it popular so that an audience that doesn't love horror movies will also love it? And I think it shows that reverence to everything as it goes.
Agreed. Very much so agreed. And it does so by getting the right people involved. You get a Wes Craven. They push for Wes Craven. Wes Craven was at a point where he was walking away from horror a little bit. He did New Nightmare, but I was kind of like, he was in touch to do The Haunting at that point. Was kind of like thinking about moving on. He did have his advances later on, but because he had that moment where Drew Barrymore got involved.
Yep.
Which is a weird thing that Drew Barrymore, who, as we know now, of course, how it ended up being, is I'm going to say glorified cameo, because she's actually one of the biggest important cameos in the history of films, the way it turns out. But it was a smaller role. But it seemed like that was the kind of one of those things that drew Wes Craven. This is somebody who's notable. This isn't just a lot of unknowns. This isn't going to be just your other average horror film in a way. He saw that it was taking new steps in a different direction. I think he finally also realized how much it did owe a life allegiance to to New Nightmare. So it made sense for him to come. But getting him involved worked perfectly because you have the writings of Kevin Williamson. You have the horror director who's done all those things. So who's better to subvert their tropes than the guy who invented some of those tropes?
Well, and not just that, he finally gets to go full Hitchcock because, I mean, to your point, he definitely seemed like he was at a place where he was kind of ready to move on and do other things. But I think he finally realized like horror was kind of the house he built alongside guys like Carpenter. And I think that really matters because he looks at it and he goes, I can do my Hitchcock. The Drew Barrymore thing is him being like, I get to use tropes that someone used in 1960 and I get to use it for an audience that is not prepared for that, which is so funny because then the Psycho remake comes out in 98. So he does Psycho before Psycho does Psycho again.
Good call.
Which is, it's just kind of funny when you think about it, which makes it that much more frustrating that Gus Van Sant, it's like, I'm going to remake Psycho. Why? We just had a movie 2 years before that was using this trope as like a plot point of we don't do this really anymore. It's fun, and we did it once, and we did it again. We don't need to keep doing it. Kevin Bacon's killed in Friday the 13th pretty early on, but he wasn't Kevin Bacon. He was just a dude who happened to be in the movie.
Right. That's one of those great things about horror films is those early horror films, early casting of like Kevin Bacon, people that get those spot the actors who they are, Johnny Depp in Nightmare kind of thing.
Matthew McConaughey in one of the Chainsaw movies.
Mm-hmm. Oh, to a degree, Liev Schreiber in this film is kind of like one of his earlier roles in a way.
Yeah, not wrong.
So that's a good one too. But let's actually get into the film now. We have the beginning parts here. We have, which I always thought, remember watching again, this very kind of cheap title card. That's it. We're not like, no flashbang, just boom, scream, here we are. And we have Drew Barrymore. And she's like, wow, okay, Drew Barrymore's in a horror film. Right away, that gets you somewhere. Now, this was partly marketing, but it was brilliant marketing. They put her on the poster. They talked about her a lot. She's this big part of the film. Right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she did press.
I'm pretty sure she did too. They were talking her up. People thought she was the star of the film. That's what it was like. And all of a sudden, they turn you on your sideways by having her get killed. Spoilers, guys, if you're a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, whatever how old the movie is.
I'm hoping that everyone listening to this is already watching these movies, considering Scream 5 comes out very soon. Very soon. I'm hoping so too. If you haven't, then you should probably stop and go back and watch them first. Or don't. Back. If you want to live that life, like fine. I'm not going to blame you, but
I'm not going to judge you.
Like also, Scream is almost better if you don't know what's happening. Just let it happen. Just let it happen.
Just let it go. But there you go. So she gets killed off in the first scene, and like that was such a turning everything on its side. Like, holy shit, this is what this movie is. What else could possibly happen? I have no idea what's going to happen at this point. But before that, we get this great introduction, this great sequence, which feels automatically, like I said before, Kevin Williamson writing Halloween. No babysitting, no kids, but it's that kind of like I'm in the whole house alone. There's a phone issues, and like there's this murder going around, and it just has that great feel of Halloween to me.
Oh, totally.
How do you feel with it? Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. It gets that kind of Home Alone style feel, not like Home Alone, the movie directed by Chris Columbus. I'm talking about like that kind of tropey, stranger, when a stranger calls, which, what is this? When a stranger calls. That's the whole kind of thought process behind this, is someone doing a version of that or playing into that. And what's so funny about that too is that I don't know, like I always wondered how it would translate because, guys, back in the day, we would get phone calls from people we didn't know because before cell phones, we really didn't have caller ID. I mean, there was home phones that could get caller ID later in the future, but that was like not a thing. You just picked up the phone.
You said hello.
And just said hello. And that's kind of one of the things I wonder if that's lost on a generation. You know what I'm saying? I do wonder
that too.
And
I do.
I mean, you still get numbers or calls from numbers you don't recognize, but it's not quite the same because it was the fear of anyone could be on the other end. And I know that sounds weird, but that's one of the things that makes this scene so scary and the movie so unnerving moving forward is that everyone basically doesn't know who could be calling at any time. And that's that makes everything scary. I mean, that's kind of the impetus of the movie too, right? Like
Right.
everything about it is that it just is anyone could be the killer, which Scream is now this new one is like super leaning on is the killer is on this poster. Yes, we see Ghostface on there and we know that you're playing up like this meta humor that also one of the characters is clearly the killer, but like it's just funny to me because that's kind of the point. Anyone in these movies could be the killer, and I think it really plays on the babysitter aspect so well. Not the real babysitter aspect, obviously, but it's more that she's home alone and trying to like do her thing. She's going to make popcorn. She's going to put on a scary movie. Like that's kind of the whole joke. You know, because it's the
literally
right.
Actually, some great jokes. When that meta joke starts happening right away, you have the whole
your favorite scary movie. You know, like
Wes Craven nightmare movies. Yeah, wow, the first one was great. The rest of them sucked. Wes Craven getting to comment on his own franchise, well, his own original versus the franchise in a way.
But I
those
think
inside jokes.
The brilliance of this is that it's so funny, but you're already unnerved because it doesn't take long for this call to go south very quickly.
Right.
And once the call goes south and things start to get real tense and you realize just how kind of out of control everything actually is, that's the moment that this movie's track becomes, we're not just like a kind of loving homage, but we're also as dark and violent and kind of fucked up as everything else around it.
Right.
But we're doing it with a sense of humor, which also makes it more scary because we're trying to make you laugh, but we're also going to literally gut Drew Barrymore.
Literally. That's one of the coolest parts of the whole scene is it gets a little gory at times, like more than I thought it would be at the first. But it is, that's the thing, you mentioned the humor aspect. I always think that like there's that fine line between like being scared and laughing. Because what do we do when there's jump scares? It's like, and you kind of giggle to yourself. It's like you had fun with that because that's how it is. So balancing that works perfectly, and they know what they're doing.
I mean, look, I can tell you, we have a mutual friend who I go to Halloween Horror Nights with every year. I go with this fine gentleman, and I see it every time when we're there together. It makes me laugh. Is that he does the thing where when one of the monsters pops out, he goes, ah, and then he starts to laugh. And it works in real life too. So, you know, it's great. And that's kind of what it is. Like for me, that's the thing I always love. It's Maxwell. I love you, buddy. You know, I'm just going to name it. It's fine. But
right now.
It just makes me laugh, man, because they so brilliantly handle that because it's not an easy tone to balance.
No,
it's not. Humor and horror are kind of like oil and water a lot of the time. And if you go too far in any one direction, if you're not trying to, your movie's not going to feel balanced. It's something that I think this movie does really great. I think that for the most part, the franchise does as a whole, but like Shaun of the Dead is a perfect example too. Shaun of the Dead takes the zombie genre and plays it so straight while being so funny.
Exactly. And Shaun of the Dead is one of the few that actually makes up with Scream as far as that balance goes. I think Scream balances a little bit more towards the horror with the funny. Whereas Shaun of the Dead balances a little bit more towards the humor with the horror, but they still thread that needle just enough where it's entertaining.
Oh, absolutely. And that's kind of what I love about it. And I think that's what made it so trailblazing and continues to make it a template that we're going back to. Because, I mean, it's not like Scream was a one-off movie. I mean, it started the parody genre all over again. Scary Movie is literally the start of them trying to spoof it. Like that's almost, there's other movies they spoof in it, but like the first one is almost a direct spoof of this movie. This movie sets the precedent of 4 more sequels, including one we haven't seen yet. It had the TV shows, 2 different versions of the TV show, like the first 2 seasons on MTV, and then the rebooted version on VH1 that Queen Latifah did. Like Scream trailblazed so much, and it changed horror in such a specific way because then things like The Faculty start to happen. Like, I Know What You Did Last Summer happens. Kevin Williamson becomes a brand.
He does in a way that writers don't often become.
Right.
There was a while where Kevin Williamson was the man for writing things. And mean, from that to Dawson's Creek to everything else, he just wrote a lot of stuff that people wanted to know. They wanted to buy the Kevin Williamson brand.
And I mean, they're still chasing the Kevin Williamson brand, right? I mean, if you think about it, like The Following was just on Fox, almost 6 years ago? Was it Fox?
Yeah.
That sounds right. And then there was he did a show called Stalker. Like, he did Vampire Diaries, and that was super popular on CW. Dude's been a whole institution since Scream. And all because he knew how to balance horror and comedy in such a weird way that Wes Craven could then bring to screen.
Yep, absolutely. And it worked. It just worked. So we have the great sequence there where Drew gets intense moments. And I love, obviously, it's a thing that all horror fans know, but it was, again, one of those wink, wink, nod, nods. She gets the first question right about, it's Michael Myers in Halloween. Then they ask about who's the killer in Friday the 13th. And she's being terrified. Oh, Jason fucking Voorhees. I've seen the movie 36 times. And like, everybody knows that's like the big horror icon thing. You're like, well, if you saw it 36 times, you know that Mrs. Voorhees was the real killer. And you love that aspect because once again, it's that inside baseball where you're coming along with me. All of us watching it, we knew that. We knew. We're like, you're wrong, Drew. You're wrong. You're going to... And then...
I'm not going to lie. She kind of deserved to die for that. Casey deserved it. I mean...
Sorry, Casey. Not Drew, but Casey.
Yeah. Sorry, Casey, but you should have known it was Mrs. Voorhees.
Exactly. You got too intense, got too fired up.
Simple. I know you were in the heat of the moment. I know that things were feeling real dense and scary, and you didn't know what to do.
Poor Steve on the patio. I get it.
I get it. But like, you just had to.
Steve was counting on you.
Yeah.
Steve was counting on you. You let Steve down.
Yeah. Well, Steve probably deserved it too.
Yeah. Let's be honest. Steve didn't look like a typical good guy either. So, and he's dating the blonde Drew Barrymore. Yeah, this is gonna go. This is obviously finally.
Honestly, she was really dodging a knife.
Right, that's true.
Only for the knife to come back.
I hear you. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
You're picking up what I'm putting down. Perfect.
I am. So we have the great run around the thing, and it's actually one of the greater sequences. I mean, and we'll probably talk about this later on. But I might spoil it down. I think this actually might be my favorite kill of the entire film because of the whole setup for it and because of like it led to so much afterwards. But like it was that great moment where she's running around the house. He gets her throat like choked. She gets choked out, and you see the parents coming home. You see the parents like walking in. You see her unable to talk. It's like that moment of like true fear. They let it out. It wasn't a quick, easy death. It was just like brutal, violent death, and you see her later on, of course, disemboweled from the tree, and it's like, oh, this is this kind of movie too. Because we had the humor aspect a little bit. You had the humor aspect of it, but they said this is the way they said, yeah, we're not also letting up on the horror. This is going to be a horror film as well,
right? And again, I really credit Craven being that guy on this. Like Williamson wrote it, and it's very clearly his film from a writing standpoint. But this is Wes being like, I'm about to put you guys on, like, you're going to see a whole workshop of how I work.
Right.
You're about to see a full institutionalized version of him brought to life because he's like, I get to be funny, but I get to be scary. I get to be fucked up. I'm going to gut people within the first 10 minutes of this movie. Entrails legitimately hanging off of bodies.
So good.
It's so crazy. And like the thing that takes it over the top is her parents showing up. It's one thing that we see the murders and we see the bodies. You see that all the time.
Right.
It's the fact that her parents get home, then they hear Casey on the phone. It's that fear of they know she's in the house. It's that fear of knowing that it's all happening.
You're listening to her die.
Yeah, they're listening to her die. That's what's fucking scary.
Mm-hmm.
That is what pushes this over. That is what makes it so unnerving and so chilling. And then you get that crazy zoom in pan on Drew hanging in the tree.
Yep, and it's all sitting that's boom, and that's what it is. That's the movie right there. And all of a sudden, you're invested. You are there, and it's so successful that they try to ape it in not only Scream but other franchises. They try to get that cold open like that to make that work, and none of them ever really never met that the level that the Drew Barrymore scene did.
I mean, but cold opens are super popular. It's funny because like you and I talked about this privately recently, because I talk about Bond cold opens all the time. I'm a
Yep.
Bond fan. Indiana Jones obviously loves the cold open. Every one of those movies has opened with some sort of cold open that kind of ties to the bigger movie, but like it's its own adventure. And scary movies have always had those too, to a point. But a lot of the time, I think it was really, at least in my mind, Halloween is the one that does it the most successfully, because that cold open is young Michael. And I felt like that was this movie is taking that, but making it even scarier, because it was so different. But again, it's a kind of a direct homage, because the parents show up at the end and Michael's standing outside in the same way that the parents show up here, but Casey's on the phone. So she's still kind of alive, but it's very much kind of an homage to that. And I've always liked it, because again, it shows Williamson likes those movies.
100%. 100%. So then we slide on to the next part, which is basically introducing Sidney and Billy Loomis, also, both in the same sequence. Sidney Prescott, obviously, has probably become Neve Campbell's most famous role. I don't think anything she was in Party of Five, I know, but I think Neve Campbell, you're thinking Scream at this point. That's what she's known for. Again, and same with Billy Loomis. He hasn't done a whole lot through there. I mean, he's done some here and there, but I still feel like this is his big role.
I think for the most part, I don't think you're wrong. And here's what I'm going to say is, I think that when it comes to most of this cast,
that's what they're
if I'm being totally honest, I kind of think that they're all pretty much known originally for this movie. And that's
only Drew know. I think Courtney Cox is more known for Friends.
Of the teenagers.
Like, the teenagers, Courtney. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Obviously, Lillard later goes on to do other things because he becomes Shaggy, and that may be the thing he's most known for at this point. But I think that a lot of these kids in this movie, or teenagers, if you will, they're all pretty well known for this. I mean, she had done The Craft before this, which again is kind of similar vein of this movie. But for the most part, it's really Scream that puts Neve on the map. Skeet Ulrich really becomes Skeet Ulrich because of this movie. Like, Matthew Lillard's career really starts to move forward. Rose McGowan, obviously, she had done like Charmed and things like this after, but it all kind of starts here. You can see, like you see it slowly coming in pieces here and there.
Right.
Drew was the obvious exception because she was the big get.
Correct.
At the time. And of course, Courtney she's in the middle of doing Friends.
Yeah, that is her big attempt to get out of, not get out of Friends, but to catapult from Friends into a film career.
She probably has the most successful film career outside of Jennifer Aniston in the Friends group at the time, because I think, she had Ace Ventura, and then
that's true.
She had done a couple of other things. Like, I mean, we could look at some of the others, but I mean, Matt LeBlanc has Lost in Space. The less said about that, the better. And
he also did chimp movies. I've got a baseball chimp movie. I can't remember what the title is now. But it wasn't that great.
Matthew Perry got to do a movie with Bruce Campbell, though, so I'm always going to give him that. Serving Sarah.
Matthew Perry also did do 2 films with Bruce Willis.
The Whole 9 Yards and The Whole 10 Yards.
That's one thing I couldn't think about. Yeah, I love The Whole 9 Yards.
I love The Whole 9 Yards, too. But the Courtney Cox playing Gail is like a big move for her, because it's still comedic, but it's a very different character than Monica, which is what she's legitimately being seen weekly on television playing every year. And then David Arquette. And Arquette's he's the top billed person in this movie, which is so funny when you think about it. David Arquette is the top billed person in this movie.
Wow. What else is he really known for besides being WCW champ?
I was going to say, other than being WCW champ, I mean, look, dude has one of my favorite horror comedies ever, which is 8-Legged Freaks.
Oh, yeah. I'll go with that.
Because I do like that. He was also in the original Buffy, not the TV show.
Airheads.
The movie, yeah. So he really doesn't have much of a career, though, either. Like, he's not the most well-known at this point. Like, he's done some things. He done that Showtime movie Robert Rodriguez made, the Road Racers one, which, if you've never seen it, it is on Blu-ray, and it is a cool fucking movie.
Yeah. I have seen that.
It is. It's very cool. Salma Hayek's in it too. John Hawkes is in it. It's very cool if you get a chance. But this is his big doing something too, because he's never led anything, really.
Yeah.
Not like this.
And not like this at all. But this is the one he does. This is where his first step is. And he does a good job with it. I think he does a good job in this role. He plays it just perfectly, where he's doofy enough where he's supposed to be, but you kind of believe he can, he can still be a deputy. Like, he's not completely out of place. You know what I mean?
He's Barney Fife-ish.
Yeah, he's a little Barney Fife-ish.
Which
exactly.
they make reference to a couple of times.
Right. But it makes sense. I mean, his relationship with Courtney Cox's character is actually one of the best parts of the film, to me, to be honest with you. I like how it goes back and forth. I mean, he obviously has this sisterly, his sister is Rose Mcgowan. He's got a sisterly crush on Neve Campbell a little bit. It's a little more protective thing than anything else. And then you have that thing where Gail Weathers is hated by Neve Campbell. And he's trying to bridge that gap. It makes it for a great dynamic that it really allows for a little bit of dramatic tension throughout the film.
It totally does. And I think that actually goes back to what you were going to bring up with Skeet Ulrich in this scene that we're introduced with them in, because Skeet Ulrich and Neve Campbell, Sydney, and Billy have definitely had a relationship for a little while. It's very clear that things are not maybe as smooth as they should be, because Sydney's mother's been killed the year previous.
Which I will say, I think they do a great job. There's nothing they did a great job is they don't slam that in you right away.
No.
They introduce the characters. You understand, when they have the whole idea about slipping into a PG-13 relationship, which I kind of found humorous at the time. But they didn't really tell you why. You kind of just got this sense that things aren't progressing as quickly as Billy would probably want it to progress. But you kind of chalk it up to just, hormonal teenage boy and that kind of situation. Obviously not too much of a dick. He's not going to completely rush her too much. He'll rush her a little bit, but he eventually respects, all right, we'll do what we have to do. But you don't find out right away why this is turned out the way it is because of Nev's mother's passing or whatever. But everything's laid out before you. When you hear oh, protective father, slow down. This all makes a lot more sense now. That's the way they do it, and it's really well done.
And I think it's one of the things that makes this movie work so well is their relationship, which obviously as we get later into the movie, it becomes much more insidious once everything is realized about these two people and kind of the relationship dynamic as it turns out. And what's so funny and so interesting though is it feels like a very naturally real kind of teenage relationship.
Yeah.
At the same time. And I also have to say, I kind of like that they don't shove what happened to Sydney in the face of everyone in a way that it's you need to feel bad because her mother died. And they even treat it very real with grief, I think.
Agreed.
And I think that that's the thing that makes everything work so well. They start to talk about it you really haven't moved on, but they're not shaming her. Because the point is more, you can't know what it's been like to be me.
Right.
And so I think that that's what makes, from this scene on, the trajectory of everything that happens following so fascinating.
Agreed. 100% agreed. It goes from there. One of the best parts about the film to me is how it progresses from there. You have, obviously, the media discovers Becker, and they have the whole town coming into an uproar. Gail Weathers comes into town. But you get the point where Sydney's waiting for Tatum because they don't want everyone to be alone. And the killer attacks Neve Campbell. And all of a sudden, Ghostface leaves. Billy Loomis shows up right after. And they have the red herring. Now, knowing what we know now, we know that Billy is part of it. So they're giving it to you right away. This is the killer. It's just a smart move, because in all horror films, you get that red herring right away, red herring in the beginnings. Okay, so this guy, you think it's the killer. That's not going to be the killer by the end, because this is just they're going to toss you. They give you the killer right away. This is one of the killers, and then they clear him.
And that's that's the fascinating thing about this whole movie, is that they really play up this angle that it could be anyone, and they go so far out of their way and they convince you it could not be him. Billy would never be the one who did this to her. In the same way oh no, go ahead.
Because you never thought it would be two.
No.
You're never thinking it's two people acting together, because that's just almost bizarrely out. It sounds almost fan fiction. there's 2 killers for doing this. Come on, all right. But it works so well the way they do it.
Right, and I think it's so funny because as the movie progresses, Stu is the only one that I think never gets out of the hot box, if you will. Like, it always feels like Stu must be involved in some way.
Right.
He just feels kind of skeezy. Like, Billy doesn't. You feel for him. And they do go out of their way, too, to then set up later that, oh, well, he had the phone. So if he has the phone, it must have been him. And I think that the dynamics of all the characters is just so great because everyone around Sydney feels like that they could potentially be the person while also never feeling like they could be the person.
I think the only one you completely ever ruled out was Rose McGowan.
Yeah.
Like that one that's felt like that the best friend that wasn't going to be the case, that she was going to die at some point and she wasn't going to be dead. But I want to bring up 2 things about Skeet. The first of all, the cell phone thing. God, that's so dated and aged now. It's so funny to think about. Like, we were watching this like in these days and they have no idea what's going on. The having a cell phone was a big deal. It was huge that he had a cell phone. Like, that's the whole thing. Instead of like, oh my God, a cell phone. Everybody has a cell phone. No, the fact that he had a cell phone made it a big deal. And secondly, was it me or did he remind you of someone like Johnny Depp?
Oh no, film? I think that's 100% intentional.
That's what I think too.
I think it's 100%.
Just like Johnny Depp began on Nightmare on Elm Street. This is very much a Johnny Depp role.
I've always kind of felt like that was a very intentional nod, if you will, to just the overall. Obviously, Depp was very, very popular around the time, but like that role in particular is one that stands out for a lot of people, and it's one of the great leading man horror side characters, if you will. And it also he also has one of the all-time great character deaths.
Yes.
And I think that they were 100% trying to allude to that too. And so I think that's where they really went with it. Because I think Wes was trying to play up that character. Because Skeet looks a lot like him.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, he just does. And he's even he looks like Depp from Jump Street.
Yeah, he does look like Depp from Jump Street in a way. Or from Nightmare on Elm Street, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
They're the same.
It's the jacket, because he wears that jacket in the movie. And the
white t-shirt kind of thing like, sometimes.
Very kind of Jump Street. And so that kind of feels, again, a little bit intentional, right? Because Williamson's also clearly a television fan. He writes a lot of television. And 100%. I think he was probably a Jump Street fan. He set this in high school for a reason. These feel like those kind of characters. And the brilliance of that brings me to the uncredited Henry Winkler playing Principal Hembree, who is one of my favorite side characters in a movie because I have such a soft spot for Happy Days. I always have. I grew up watching it in reruns on like Nick at Night. And it's just such a different role for him comparative to the things that we've seen from him. Because it's kind of mean-spirited.
Yeah, he's not the cool Fonz guy. No, he's kind of a dick to a degree. I mean, I get what he's doing, but like he's definitely overreactive on some things about it. Like just the way he comes down on them very hard.
Yeah, I mean, he expels those 2 kids, and he's got the one. He's got the scissors, and it's very scary because, we haven't really talked about it, but in this moment with the movie, everyone is aware that the murders have happened to Casey and her boyfriend, and so news media is everywhere, and there's a curfew on the town, and the high school is pulled people in one by one, and he's like, they've all interviewed people, and they're all kind of talking to people, but now you have these kids kind of running rampant, trying to scare people, particularly Sydney, and so he's feeling the heat because he's the principal of the high school, and it's just like this whole beat with him is so great because, again, all you can be like is that's fucking Arthur Fonzarelli. You know what I'm saying? Like, that is Arthur Fonzarelli, and he's about to be murdered.
And the best part about it is, like, he's yelling at these kids, and what happens? He puts the mask on and starts like, joking around like himself, and it's like, really? That's what you're doing? Okay.
But there's some brilliance in this of you're waiting for the kill to happen. And again, this is what Craven is so good at, is that building of tension, that building of character beat. And so he kicks these kids out, and he's kind of in there, and he's kind of playing with the mask, and you're just waiting because you just know someone is there.
I mean, they do the fake out thing a couple of times, like that. There's no door. And the best part that, of course, obviously for me was the minor fake out was this exactly Fred the School Janitor, just is Wes Craven as Fred.
Yeah, wearing a very similar
Yes.
Actually, identical
sweater.
sweatshirt to Fred Krueger.
Right.
No idea what that would be about.
I have no idea.
No. That's a reference. Weird homage.
But that's what I think. So that when you see that, it's almost kind of like, oh, okay, maybe nothing. Maybe it's just a fake out in general. And I don't know if you realize this. I remember reading about this. I forget where I read about this. This was actually a character. This was a latecomer character. They wanted to have. I think it was one of the producers decided there was too much time between deaths in the movie that they wanted to have another death in there. So Kevin Williamson kind of created the character just to kill him in a way, just to have something in the meantime. That's what the movie do. And sometimes it should always be about the story, but sometimes you got to get that little excitement factor for the audience too. So you'll see a little bit thing. And Williamson didn't mind it. So
no, because I mean, it fits into the narrative of the overall story. Like, it doesn't feel tacked on, which is why it works, because studio notes like that come through all the time. You hear about it in interviews. Like, Kevin Smith talked about it a ton with the Superman Lives thing when he was writing Superman Lives, is they wanted an action beat every 10 pages. Like, you're always trying to keep the audience engaged to a point. And so I can see where they're coming from, because actually there is a pretty long time between set pieces, quote unquote, or murders in the movie that if you don't have this. And I like that they cast, again, Henry Winkler, because it became the kind of brilliance of having a Drew Barrymore.
Yes,
who is someone super recognizable, someone you like, someone that you don't want anything to happen to, but someone is going to definitely have happened to.
Right. 100%.
And I think that that's, again, what the casting of this movie is so good across the board, is that you see all these kind of fresh faces, but you start to really fall for the characters. I even like Principal Hembree. I really do. I like Principal Hembree.
He's a great character.
He's a great character, and this movie is chock full of great characters with great dialogue. And so that's what's always worked in this movie for me in this, is that it doesn't matter who they have in what place and how. It's just, you like each piece. And I think that that's why the movie works just brilliantly.
Brilliant that way, exactly. Also, the funny part about that is, also I read it as well, is that not only did they have to create the character, but by creating this character at his death, it actually solved a problem that Williamson was having with the final act, is in how to get all the kids out of the house.
Yeah.
At the end, and Nelson, we'll kill Hembree, hang up the goalpost. It solves everything. We can get the kids out of the house because they want to go see it. Makes sense. They want to go see that because kids are fucked up and they want to see that shit.
I mean, and that's 100% stand by me, right?
100% stand by me.
The whole thing is these kids
go
want to see a dead body. So that's that feels like a nod to that in a way.
Yep, 100%. Speaking of introducing characters and interesting characters in a franchise to me, is we get Liev Schreiber in here as Cotton Weary, and he's barely in the film.
It's like
barely in the film. That's basically it. I don't think he even has a line, does he? I think that's it. I think it's just TV footage. I can't remember. I watched this a week ago, but very little. But it's amazing how much that's developed and that character developed. I know. Jesus. I'm only a mediocre white dude. I can't do much.
Yeah, that's fair. Fucking mediocre dudes on
But it's amazing how much he develops along the franchise. It's just a great, subtle way to bring back. It's a great way for a franchise to build, is to take these characters that appear in the first one and then build them out from there. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and creating new characters.
You're 100% right. And as we know, when Kevin Williamson went in and pitched the movie, he didn't pitch just a single movie. His pitch was, this is my Bible for 3 separate films.
Right.
He was like, this is a story that will go beginning to end. Of course, stuff had to change, and we'll get to that with the second one because the script was leaked.
Yep.
And so they had to rewrite most of the movie, which actually explains a lot about Scream 2, I think, and I think even further Scream 3. But it's just fascinating to me because you look at it, it's very clear world building in a way that you don't see all the time. Because, or you kind of do, in a way. Ever since Marvel popularized the cinematic universe, everyone's been trying to do world building. But here it feels so seamless. And we look at it now in hindsight, it almost feels like, how did you do that? Because not many people could sell 3 movies at one time like that. Like, this dude's not Spielberg.
No. This guy has barely anything on his credits at this point, but yet, hot shit, hot talented shit. But that's good for that, though.
No, it's just fascinating, and it sets a dynamic for later movies. So you do see Leave in this. It's just a very small part on the television. He has been accused of murdering Sydney's mom.
Right. And we discover, obviously, throughout, Gail Weathers wrote a book on it. Courtney Cox character wrote a book on it, and basically shed doubt on Nev Campbell's story, Sidney Prescott's story, because the whole basis of his arrest was hinged upon her recollections and her wanting to find the killer. It sets up a great dynamic. Of course, it's got the great moment that everyone remembers where Sidney Prescott knocks Gail Weathers in her ass. Boom, bitch went down, that kind of thing.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It was a beautiful moment. It's great. But I did love their developing characters work there, because at the same time, there's that one moment where Courtney Cox there's a couple moments that she feels human.
Yes.
Whereas most of the time she feels very Vulture, very journalistic Vulture kind of thing. Like you don't like her. You're not supposed to like what she's doing. Like she's sleazy. But there's a moment where like you realize that she's realizing that Sidney Prescott is potentially faltering on her own memory, and she starts going, maybe there is somebody out there. There's this moment where Courtney Cox, besides wanting to capitalize on the money wise or whatever, because it's a great sequence in her face where she's like, wow, I actually could be right. Not only did I do this for money, but maybe he is right. Maybe there's something here. And it was well done. It's not a horror franchises aren't known for their performances or anything else, but I really dug what Courtney did in that scene.
I actually think, to your point, yeah, horror franchises aren't really well known for their acting a lot of the time. I think it's actually something over the last decade and a half, maybe two, has shifted. I actually think Scream has Scream was a big part of that in the 90s. Like, yeah, we're not saying that horror movies don't have good performances. Like, that's not what we're saying. Obviously, things like Psycho were an exception, though.
Right.
Like, that was a movie that is incredibly well acted.
Right. But most horror films, though, are low budget.
Yeah.
Whoever they can get to fill the roles, as long as they look good on camera, and they're not looking for big performances. And that's the way it just was for a long time. When you get a bigger budget, you get a bigger draw. In this case, Drew Barrymore signing on helps them out. They took a little bit more time. They got a few more performers that could actually take the material and run with it, which is what elevates the film.
Right, and that's why it continues to stand out. Like, look, I love Halloween, but I wouldn't say that anyone in that movie outside of Pleasance and even Jamie Lee Curtis in that first one, no one's great in that movie.
Yeah.
I mean, and even
Donald Pleasance is hamming it up anyway. I mean, I love Donald Pleasance, but this is Donald Pleasance is like, he's not acting great. He just knows, he's just so good at what he does. He can do that and be brilliant at what he does.
And even I would say like Jamie Lee is great in the movie, but I wouldn't say it's like an incredibly great performance. I would say everyone in this movie is giving a very good to great performance.
Yeah.
Because every one of these characters feels very real and feels very like someone that you would know. Someone who exists in these movies. And I got to shout out, we have not talked about him yet, Jamie Kennedy.
Just about to do that. Wait just a second. Yeah. Like, we're talking about performances. Let's bring him in. Let's talk about it. I know my favorite. I know pretty much sure it's your favorite. Jamie Kennedy is the heart of this movie.
Randy Meeks.
Hands down.
Randy Meeks is what happens when you put a guy like me in a horror movie.
Jamie Kennedy is the mediocre white dude in the movie.
Yes. There's no doubt in my mind that Jamie Kennedy is not the premier mediocre white horror trope character of all horror trope characters. Randy Meeks rocks.
He does. He's the most entertaining, the most hilarious, the most, like, I want to say, like, because people always will say, like, he's too animated to be real, too cartoonish. Like, that's what we were. That's what I was.
That's what we are. What are you talking about?
That's what we are. That's true what we are. I'm trying to
What are we doing right now?
We're
literally doing what Randy Meeks would do. If Randy Meeks was still alive, he would be doing a podcast just like us, talking about horror movies and the things that he loves about them. That 100%. God damn it. Randy Meeks should still be alive. Spoiler alert for
We're going to talk. This is a big Scream 2 conversation we're going to have. I mean, we know this.
Randy
It's
Meeks
coming.
should have had a podcast.
Yes, 100%.
I would have listened to a Randy Meeks someone get Jamie Kennedy to be Randy Meeks now doing a radio show between Scream and Scream 2, and he can only talk about horror movies pre-99.
Yeah, he got to come out. Yeah, that's perfect. I like that. He can talk about anything he wants as long as it fits that bill. I mean, because let's just one more thing I do have to say real quick before we go any further about that is it harkens back to what I said earlier, and that this franchise wanted to bring the audience along with it. It's the wink and nod. So this is like that to the next level. This is actually bringing us literally into the movie with them.
This character literally exists to talk about the rules of horror and
the best sequence in the movie.
The audience through separate tropes in ways that the audience has never heard them broken down to, like in this way at any time. That's what
stuff that you've known. You know this is a horror fan. Everything's like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. But you never got to really sit down and go, this is what it is.
It's so good, and he's so good at it. And he was the perfect catalyst and kind of lightning rod character that brings everything together. This movie doesn't work without Randy. Like, straight up, if you take Randy out of this movie doesn't work. And that is a credit to Jamie Kennedy. Because 100%. Kennedy's performance needs to work. If Kennedy 100%. Doesn't work, then the movie doesn't work. So on and so forth.
There's so many ways it could go wrong. Like, there's so many ways because it is such a... it is so animated, so cartoonish way. It could, if done wrong or done too much, it could flip over into this kind of parody of itself. It's just like the whole balance I was talking about, the whole balance of these films between horror and comedy. Jamie balances that well because he's real, a little exaggerated at times, but like you never feel like it's not grounded enough.
No, definitely. And that's why I love the performance. And it's why I love the character, and it's why, again, we'll get to it with Scream 2 and like what happens, but it's so important specifically for this movie that this character works. And I think the thing that I really like too is that he basically becomes the final boy. We don't see a lot of final boys in horror. And so the fact that they really lean on that and let him survive is so kind of cool because it's different. We don't see that all the time. Like, I can name some movies, like Freddy vs. Jason actually comes to mind. Final girl, final boy, they ride off into the sunset. But
that very rarely happens. But,
it very rarely happens that you have that. I mean, so them giving those characters that... Actually, you know what's funny? You have 4 separate characters who survive this by the time it's over. I mean, 4 lead characters surviving a horror movie is pretty great.
Unheard of. That's unheard of almost in a way. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Jamie Kennedy's character in almost any other franchise is definitively dead in the first film.
I mean, he's...
Definitively.
And not just that, usually like the first to go.
Yeah. Right. He might make it... Well, he probably in this kind of would have made it just enough like to say the rules, be a little funny, and then go.
Right.
Like he'd survive. I think he survived the first one, so they explain why it happened, and then they kill him off. But
which is
this one. Smart.
Which is I'm gonna have to assume is the point.
Yes.
Right?
Agreed.
Because you're all assuming that this is exactly what's gonna happen. Jamie Kennedy is going to die.
Right.
That is just what is going to happen. But
and in a way they do the nice red herrings throughout. Because they give you that tease at the end that wait, maybe Jamie Kennedy is the killer after all. They throw that little snippet at it, and you kind of like, you don't want it to be because you're like, I like this guy. I don't want him to be the bad guy. I want him to be the good guy that saves the day almost because he's you, because he's us. He is our character. But they do throw it out there. It kind of makes you think. The whole movie does that. Makes you think like, well, maybe it could be. No, could be. Never know.
Again, I think it's brilliantly acted. It's brilliantly written. And that's why this character is so good because, again, in any other franchise, this dude is done quick because that's the point. And I'm glad that this franchise was like, we're taking that point and we're flipping it upside down.
100%. 100%. And the rules, let's be honest, the rules is definitely my favorite part of the movie. Watching Halloween, you see Prom Night in there, you see those movies that are in there.
Terror Train.
They're Terror Train, yep, there you go. And then when he started doing it, he said the whole thing like, you can't have sex, and they're throwing popcorn at him and everything else. And the best part about it is they all want to see the dead body. And what does Jamie Kennedy do as the horror nerd? But we're watching Halloween. Like,
I mean, that's the correct response.
He sits down, he's all drunk, and that was the most scariest part of the movie when you think he is going to die. Because they're watching, obviously, you got Kenny, the cameraman, has the camera set up, and you're watching with that delay, the 10-second delay. And also, you see them watching the camera, and you see Ghostface right behind Jamie Kennedy. You're like, no, don't do it. Don't do it.
Well, and I think the best part, too, is where you're seeing it is also what he's watching at the same time. So he's like, Jamie, he's behind you. He's behind you. And like, this is incredible.
Saying his name. Yeah. Jamie, he's behind you.
Just that.
It's like a double.
It's so good. And them realizing, like, oh my God, it's happening. There's this delay. Like, is he going to get killed? And then Ghostface, like, turns and runs out.
You're like, oh, wait, that was delayed.
Yeah. And it just, I love this whole setup is that they're all in this house. It's a house that's kind of outside of the city limits. They're not super close to the town. Like, they're close to the town, but they're far enough away that there's no one really around. So Courtney Cox's Gale is there. Dewey is there. They are trying to find an abandoned car.
Yep.
While Gale is also trying to see if she can capture any footage of something happening. Right. Because she's a reporter. This is what she does. And so this whole kind of dynamic that all the kids now are in one place except for the ones who leave.
Right.
There's cameras in this house. Basically you've laid this playing field of a game board with, you're out in the middle of nowhere. There's not really anyone around to hear you scream. And what happens when those pieces are in place? You've gotten rid of pretty much everyone because Dewey's off trying to get laid.
Yep.
And that's his focus. I mean, I'm not going to say yes or no. I'm just saying that's what he's doing. I think my favorite line in that movie, by the way, is when him and Gale are like walking down the street, and he's like, he like points to one of the constellations. He goes, "What? You know what constellation that is?" And she goes, "No, what?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me."
You would.
Yeah, like it's just so. It's so
great.
Sweet and innocent and adorable, and also just like, Dewey, you fucking doofus. Like, you fucking doofus. And yet it works.
Yeah, it totally does.
But, so I like the way they set this stage, because, again, it's actually a pretty small-scale movie. Like, we really haven't talked about that, but there's only a handful of locations in the movie.
Yep.
Because there's the high school, there's the initial house for Casey, there's Sydney's house, there's Dewey's house, and there's this one.
Yep.
Like, it's all basically just 5 separate sets. There's not a lot of expansion and world building in this town.
Right.
And I like that because it keeps everything contained to these like very specific places. And 100%. The reason it works is because we like home. Some of the best horror movies are set in contained homes because that's where we feel safe.
Right. And it's a way to get scared.
Yeah, and it's a way to get it in under your skin that, oh my God, the one place I'm going to feel safe is not safe. Yeah, not just not safe, is also the final act.
Right.
Like, everything bad that can happen in this movie is about to happen in one place, and it's the one place I don't want to feel like I can't be scared. Like, I'm going to lock my doors at night by the time it's over.
Right, 100%. Well, let's get into that final act, because there it is. Billy has sex with Sidney Prescott, going against the rules just laid out.
I mean, to be fair, she wasn't in the room when they laid out those rules.
That's true.
Because remember, his whole thing is that he's been arrested. They think that he may have been the one who made the calls to her originally. That's
very true.
So there's this dynamic now that, is he the bad guy? Is he the good guy? He shouldn't be there. But then, of course, Matthew Lillard's Stu kind of let him know that he was going to be there. So now he comes to this party. And Jamie Kennedy goes, "What is Leatherface doing here?" Like, there's this.
I love that line too.
Yeah, it's a great line, and there's just a little bit of tension now.
A little bit.
He wants to pull Sydney away. He wants to talk to Sydney. He wants to signal. He wants to signal. Wow, single out Sydney, and he wants to get her alone.
Absolutely. You know what? Real quick, just a tangent back. I just want to mention the blockbuster scene, the movie video sequence. Is one of my favorite also in the film. Before it's like pre-rules, when he starts yelling in the middle of the story about it. So good. And it lets you know what's going on right then and there. Jamie Kennedy knows. That's the thing we never think about. The whole thing, he lays it out before you because he knows the rules. And he tells you who the killer is.
Exactly.
And we don't believe him at that point. We do now, though.
And you have to. You've got to believe him. And that's what, again, the brilliance of this movie is that Kennedy is a character that no one would listen to, and no one does listen to, but he's right. Because
he is the guy, he is us saying, Jamie, there's somebody behind you.
Correct. Jamie, there is somebody behind you. And so, let's talk
go back
behind you.
Right. So you got Billy Loomis having sex with Nev, and then almost immediately after, we get the big reveal that it's Billy Loomis, but it's not just Billy Loomis, it's also Stu. And that right there shook me to my core.
And not just that. So, like, this is the scariest part about all this, too, is not just that these two are in this together. They're also the ones who killed her mother.
Right. And I gotta be honest, that threw me for a loop for a little bit. I had to process that one.
It's a lot.
At one point I was kind of like, is that a step too far in my mind? But then when Billy Loomis kind of comes out with his motive, it made sense. And it was like, wow, okay. I said the only difference is that they waited a long time between killing Sydney's mom and then killing everybody else. But
I mean, look, dude, Dexter's waited almost 10 years between the end of season 8 and Dexter New Blood. It happens, okay? Sometimes serial killers have to wait.
Okay, fair enough. But it is a great
watching
reveal.
New Blood. Fucking watch New Blood. I'm actually pretty sure by the time this airs, it will be over. So I'll be really happy that it's over, or I'm going to be real mad that it's over. But so far, I'm not mad at all because I think it's the best Dexter has been in 15 years. So please watch Dexter New Blood. Continue.
Yeah, like that plug. Go ahead, plug away, man.
What I'm here for.
But what you get? It's like I said, I was very surprised it was two killers. I wasn't what I was expecting. Spent the whole time who done it. We weren't asking who else done it, and it was a great way to throw Billy Loomis under the bus. Stu could take care of the stuff. It all like kind of locked into place with Sydney just feeling it. Like as they're telling you what happened, they're Scooby doing it. You're like, okay, I get it, and I'm actually pretty impressed.
It's pretty remarkable, really, because it's the kind of thing that, again, you just said it, no one's expecting it. Because when you watch a lot of these whodunit type things, in any regard, you're never looking at it as more than one person.
Right.
You're always waiting for the singular person who is always the one focus, if you will. And
right.
In this one, for it to be not that it was just one person with a grudge, but it was two people with like delusions of grandeur.
Right.
And this idea that they just want to be famous and like fucked up and weird and killing people, like it's actually super terrifying.
It is very terrifying. Just because and I like they tease the thing like it's the 90s. We don't need a motivation. And they give you both because they give you a successful motivation with Billy.
Yeah.
Stu doesn't have any motivation.
My mom and dad are gonna be so mad at me. Oh man, he's just in it because he's kind of just there with Billy,
right?
Like he's just kind of chilling. He's thinking, I'm just gonna hang with Billy and we're gonna do this thing and it's gonna be fun and we're gonna enjoy it. He's not thinking of the fucking outcome.
Not at all.
He had no idea he was gonna get a TV dropped on his head. Zero clue that he was going to get a TV dropped on his head.
Poor guy.
No, not poor guy. He's an asshole. He's a fucking asshole. They're both assholes.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by assholes.
I love that movie too.
I know.
We should do that at some point. We'll have to do that at some point too. Maybe we'll add that when you ever do Star Wars.
Mel Brooks is never off the table.
Exactly. 100%. But Matthew Lillard. Actually, one of my favorite parts of Matthew Lillard is when they discover that Sidney Prescott's gone. And Billy hits him with the phone.
Oh my god!
And, like, the blood is coming out of his mouth, so he's like, "Oh, get me with the phone, hello, who's here?"
Dude, their whole relationship and the way that it starts to like very quickly unravel. They play this long game because throughout the movie they have this whole setup that Sidney's father is missing, and they think he might be involved too. And so then here they are having him tied up, and then her finding him.
Yes.
Getting the voice changer in the mask, and she's like, I'm going to terrorize you two. Let's see how you like it. Let's flip the narrative and see how you feel dealing with the same shit that you put everyone else through.
Exactly. It stops her from being just the final girl. She's no longer Jamie Lee Curtis from Halloween. She's Jamie Lee Curtis from H2O.
Yeah. Like, that's exactly it. She's hunting them now. And I think that was such an important jump for the series to make, because I think you had to have her in this movie not be like the damsel in distress the whole time.
Right. You don't want David Arquette to come back and save her, or like Jamie Kennedy come back and save her. I think that's
it had
Jamie Kennedy maybe.
It had to be Sidney.
But it had to be Sidney. Right.
And so for Sidney to decide that this is what she's going to do, she's going to turn the tables.
Right.
And so brilliantly doing that, it makes that third act even more exciting, because we see all these movies where the third act, like, there's always a battle of some sort, right? You always fight Jason, you always fight Freddy, you always fight Michael. But really, if you think about it, the original Halloween, she doesn't really fight Michael.
No, not at all.
She sits in the closet as he's trying to get in, and then Loomis walks in and shoots him.
Yeah.
He shot him 5 times. 5 times. Remember, he shot him 5 times.
6 times.
Is it 6?
There's I think it's 6 times. I remember, like, in Halloween 2, you actually hear 7 bullets. That's a totally different. We'll get to that later.
Oh, that's continuity. But the point is, Loomis shoots him a whole bunch of times, and Jamie doesn't really fight him. Like, the fact that we got this movie where she actually gets to turn the tables and fight these two and win is great. And I think that makes Sidney maybe the all-time great final girl, continually the all-time great final girl, because she's clearly survived every one of these movies to this point. We have not.
Well, I will also say that's true. But I will also say that it's great. It was great having Courtney Cox help her out at the end a little bit, and them coming together, considering their animosity or whatnot. Yes. And that made sense to us too. It's like, okay, she's coming together. They're coming together as these two powerful women in their own way, both powerful in their own way, and they defeat these psycho guys who just are losers, and they're losers. But
I mean, that's exactly what they are. They're losers, and they've decided to put these two in their place.
Absolutely, and it's great.
And that's kind of the great thing about it, right? Like, if you think about it, it's just different for the time.
It very much so was. We end it. We have the trope. We even have the tried and true trope of Jamie Kennedy going, watch out. Like, he's going to come back to life. And Billy Loomis does come back to life if we're getting the final headshot. Not in my movie. And that's where we end. And at the end, you're left with this film that has entertained, has horrified, made you laugh, and in a way reinvented the genre and breathed new life into a genre which was dying.
It really did. You're right. And it's so funny because, again, like, looking at it now, right, after watching this movie, it ends and it feels pretty definitive. So once again, you're sitting here thinking about, they sold this as 3 movies.
Right.
But there's not a single time that when I've watched the original Scream that I look at it and go, it doesn't feel complete. No, this feels like a very complete one film story. Yes, we know that you sold it as 2 or 3, but it doesn't feel like it. And that, it's so mind-boggling to me, and it makes me wonder, why can't we get more things like this? Like, it's so funny to me because I think that this movie does all the world building and stuff very early on. Little nods that there could be more.
Right.
You can do more. all the motivation's there, all the little pieces are there, but you don't necessarily need it, right? Like, it all works within the confines of what it's doing. So it doesn't
100%.
really matter. And that's amazing to me. Now, the other thing I want to talk about real quick, and this is actually more about the movie as a whole and its release. We didn't bring up, you know what the weirdest thing about this movie is?
What's that?
This was a fucking Christmas release. It came out in December of 1996.
That's right.
1996. This movie comes out at Christmas.
What a weird programming decision, in a way.
It is, and it works though. It's it's a total like them doing this counter programming in the middle of 96. What else comes out in 96? Let's take a look of December of 1996, because I have to think that this was 100% them being like, we can counter program against all these things that are coming out at the same time, right?
Right.
So in December of 96, if we're looking at it, the number one film is 101 Dalmatians because it opens in November, the live action remake starring Glenn Close. You also have Jerry Maguire, Beavis and Butthead Do America right around the same time. Like, very fascinating that the stuff that's kind of out right around then is not, it's all like popular stuff, but then Michael opens 5 days later with John Travolta.
John Travolta, right?
Mother, which is what is his name? I can see him.
Albert Brooks.
Yes, Albert Brooks. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
I'm thinking of the other one with Ed Harris, and it's like, that's 2017. What are you thinking? Okay.
Right. So then you look at it, the stuff that's opening the same day, My Fellow Americans, Dan Aykroyd, James Garner, Jack Lemmon, like these weird movies that don't really make a lot of sense.
Right. That's also One Fine Day with George Clooney and Michelle Pfeiffer, like a rom-com that, what?
Right. So this movie kind of takes December by storm.
Yeah.
Because there's not like, Hamlet's the only thing I'm looking at on here other than maybe Michael, where I'm like, okay, like I see that made an imprint on certain generations of people, but like nothing in this. No. Even in the stuff that will open afterwards. Like, if you look the next week, like the next couple of weeks, there's nothing in that January slot that screams, oh, hey, these are things that people will care about. So I find it fascinating that a movie like this can drop in the middle of a December release and not only, like, stand out and not bomb at Christmas, but be, like, the only thing really interesting at Christmas.
Yeah, that's a pretty impressive thing. So no wonder. Yeah. The only one that seems to me, looking at the list, is I could see Evita having a big impact at the time.
Oh, I didn't even see Evita on it.
Madonna was huge at that point, and her being in that role was a huge zeitgeist moment. I don't know if it's a zeitgeist. It's not a zeitgeist now as it was then, but at that time, that was huge. But it's still
I didn't look far
counter-programming.
enough back. I apologize. I was only on the 20th. Yes, that's Evita. Okay. I apologize for that. I know that, and I guess The Preacher's Wife opened the week before.
Oh wow, that one's but still very much. It's still very much counter programming to something like Scream.
Yeah, and that's what I mean is like the fact that this movie blows up and ends up doing what it does is so crazy to me, because
impressive.
You don't think about horror movies a lot of the time as a December release. Like no one, I don't think, thinks about it that way. Like I can think of a couple after the fact, but I don't think that they ever do nearly as well on a Christmas break as, say, this movie actually did.
Yeah, good call. Good call, man.
Just fascinating to me. What did they say? It opened at like 6 million.
Yeah.
But so they considered it at the time. It was like a gamble and it failed, but then it never dropped, and it continued and it continued and it continued. It made over $100 million at the box office. That's
impressive. That's impressive legs right there, considering.
This is the kind of movie that changes everything. And that's why we're talking about it. That's why there's a new movie coming out. That's why this conversation's happening. That's why this movie impacted us. A movie that, counter-programming wise, changed the game after kind of opening super low,
Right.
grossing over $100 million, changing the horror genre at the time, putting a bunch of these people on the map, putting Kevin Williamson on the map. And we didn't even talk about the fact the dude who edited this is Patrick Lussier. Patrick Lussier would go on to direct My Bloody Valentine 3D, Drive Angry, Dracula 2000. Like, he directed an episode of the Screen TV series. He did part of the Purge TV series. And he was a writer on a bunch of other movies, Terminator Genesis notwithstanding. And he was also
an editor on the Doctor Who TV movie.
Yes. And I was going to bring that up, but did you see what the other one is? Halloween H2O.
Oh, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Mm-hmm. And Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
So a lot of the similar. Wow. Okay. So Patrick Lussier did a lot around that time. So he has a very strong influence at horror at that time.
And he also did the editing of the Doctor Who TV movie. Let's not let that go unnoticed. We
know that's going to happen at some point. You realize
at the Mediocre White Space Man podcast. We don't. We stand Paul McGann as the Doctor.
We do.
I love Paul McGann as the Doctor. That TV movie, maybe not the best, but
we're going to do a Doctor Who podcast at some point, aren't we?
Oh, it's got to happen. I mean,
it's going to happen at some point.
There's plenty to talk about if we're going to talk about Doctor
Who. 100%. But let's not do that now. Let's wrap this up. We're at the end of Scream. I want to give you your final thoughts. Final thoughts about the movie, where you were as far as and how it started the franchise, and what we're going to look at going forward.
I mean, look, man, I kind of said it all in a way. It's like, it's mind blowing to me that a movie like this even exists and sets the table for all this other stuff while also feeling so complete. It was so just well put together, just so well done, and I love everyone in it. I just think that the reason this movie works is that Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven ended up being like a totally perfect peanut butter and jelly style pairing. It's a thing that you don't necessarily think about as a thing that works, but it took someone like Kevin Williamson, who's young, has this vision, wants to do something different with the slasher genre, and taking someone who gets the slasher genre, has been around the slasher genre much longer than Kevin Williamson has, and to add legitimacy to this movie, and for the two of them to come together and create this movie is kind of mind-blowing. It's something that I don't think we see a lot of these days, because a lot of the time, for better or worse, a lot of this stuff is kind of workshopped to death and kind of lives on a like a working machine of cogs and wheels, and it's all kind of manufactured to be a hit, right? That is not what this movie was.
No.
This movie was not a manufactured hit. Like, this was a movie that was blood, sweat, and tears, and a bunch of people wanting to put everything they could into doing something that was a love letter to a genre that, for all intents and purposes, was mocked by a lot of people and not seen as important.
It was on life support.
It was on life support, and that matters.
Yes.
There's a reason that this movie is so defining. There's a reason that we're still talking about it. There's a reason that they keep trying to capture that magic again. There's a reason that they chased it through the 90s and the 2000s. There's a reason that this started a whole subsect of this, like, Kevin Williamson-esque killers with teenagers tropes. Like, there's people that'll say that it actually destroyed part of the horror genre through the 2000s. I don't know if I agree with that, but like that, there's enough people who believe it that it had that sort of an effect.
I would say, I would argue that counterpoint is that it's not that Scream did that, but movies inspired by Scream went going the wrong direction.
No, totally, but all because Scream existed,
sure,
right?
Fair enough. But you know what? Scream had to resurrect it in order for it to be close to killed again.
Right. So, it's just one of those things. And I can't think of a better movie that loves the thing that it loves so much in a way that this one does. This movie is fucking special, dude. Like,
it is very special.
It used to be special. It will always be special. And I think that that's why, again, so all this time later, we're talking about this 25 years later.
100%, man.
25 years later, we are still talking about this movie, and it still works.
And we're still be talking about it in 25 years from now. Even if Scream 5 fails, I think you're still be talking about this original film, probably second one as well, the franchise in general.
Scream
has lasted throughout life.
Scream is Psycho. Scream is Halloween. Scream is Nightmare. Scream is Friday. These are the ones that continue to live on. Like, it doesn't matter where you were. You remember the first time that you saw one of these movies. It doesn't matter how much you know about horror. You know who Ghostface is. You know, do you want to play a game? You know, what's your favorite scary movie? We've all heard it. And it doesn't matter if you've seen it or not. My parents hate scary movies. My parents both know. Like, it's been parodied to death. It doesn't mean, like, Psych, Simpsons, Scary Movie. All these things have parodied these things to the point that it's
in the
pop
zeitgeist.
culture. It's zeitgeist.
It's zeitgeist.
That is what makes the movie so special.
So let's do our rankings now. We're just at the end of every episode, every film we do. We're gonna rank it out of 11 because we're just too good for 10. We might be mediocre white dudes, but our rankings are a little higher than 10. We could turn it up to 11.
Spinal Tap before this, weren't you?
That could have been. That could be it. I will not confirm or deny that.
You didn't even invite me to watch Spinal Tap, and here you are being like, we're turning this shit up to 11. I do like Christopher Guest.
You can't go wrong. Christopher Guest.
Rob Reiner, Christopher Guest. You know what? I really need to rewatch Best in Show. It's been a while since I've seen that.
That's a good one. That's a good one to watch.
Yeah.
But let's rank this. We're going to rank this, and we're going to rank the franchise. And I think at the end of the episode, end of the season, we will give a podcast ranking of the franchise from best to worst or worst to best, however we want to do it, and an average film rating score from the two mediocre white dudes.
Yeah. That's
so,
move.
Out of 11, where do you get Scream?
This movie's an 11, dude. Turn that 11. Shit up. Like,
okay.
I can't think of many films that I can consider perfect. This is one of those films I can consider perfect.
Okay. I will give it a 10.5. I'm right there with you.
Fucking bad man.
Bad man. There's sometimes a little bit too 90s for me sometimes. Like of its time.
You're out of your mind.
It is, and I do think that, whereas I did argue it before, I did argue against it before, I do think that Scream's influence has a negative side to it as well. Unfortunately, a lot of things. I think, again...
The next time I see you, I'm lighting you on fire.
You're acting like I gave it a 5. I gave it a 10.5 out of 11, for Christ's sake.
You said 5. The 5 was in
10.5. 10.5. Well, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed our first episode. I hope you enjoyed two mediocre white dudes talking about Scream. And you'll come back for next week where two mediocre white dudes will talk about Scream 2 and the most controversial moment in the franchise history, which we're going to get into. It's a very sad moment for us, but we'll talk about that then.
I'm amazed that you think you're going to make it to next week after you get the 10.5. Fucking dude.
I can dodge. I can dip dodge. I'll make it through. I'll figure out a way.
All right, dodgeball boy.
All right, BJ. Always great to talk to you, my friend. Great to see you. We'll be back next week, and until then, take care, guys. From two mediocre white dudes to you.
I hope all of you out there stay mediocre too.
That's our new catchphrase. I like it. We'll do it. Okay.